I got hired recently at a fast food restaurant as a part-time job for the summer. For most of my shifts, I would work at the drive-thru window and hand out the prepared food. I was about 2 weeks in and met a lot of regular customers, but one guy was different than the rest. His name was Dieter. It began as just some casual banter of how my day was going and how long I worked there. As the days went by, it slowly transitioned to what I was studying in college and where. Eventually, he asked me if I had a boyfriend. At the time, I was casually seeing a guy I met in one of my classes, but we hadn't really spoken about anything long-term or put a label on it. I told Dieter that I was seeing someone, but didn't bother going into the details of our relationship. Even though he was a regular customer, that wasn't any of his business. He told me that it was quite a shame and he would have really liked to take me out. As the weeks followed, he would continue to buy his morning coffee and breakfast sandwich. Sometimes, if he didn't show up in the morning, it was the mid-afternoon before my shift was over for his lunch order. Dieter was quite attractive, and about 5 years older than me, but I don't think the best love stories are the ones that happen through a drive-thru window. I took a couple days off because I was not feeling too well and didn't want to pass it on to anyone I was working with. The day I went back, before I started my shift, one of the other employees said that someone had left me something and they had put it in the back room on the table. When I went to check, I found a bouquet of flowers and a note that said, "Get well from your favorite customer." I instantly knew it had to be Dieter. I went back and asked the employee who the stranger was, and when they described him to me, the traits definitely matched Dieter's. They told me that the 2 days I was away, a man asked about me when grabbing his order and was curious to know when I would be back. The store policy was that they weren't allowed to tell anybody when my next shift was, but they did mention that I wasn't feeling well. I took a moment to think how genuinely kind and thoughtful the gesture was from Dieter, but also weird. None of the other regulars treated me like this. There was an obvious interest he had in me, but I was seeing someone. I didn't feel the same way about him. The next morning, Dieter places his order and meets me at the front of the window to pick it up. He had a huge grin on his face when he saw me. He told me how glad he was that I was back and hoped I was feeling better. I thanked him for the flowers. Before he drove off, he pulled a gift card out of his pocket. He told me he remembered how much I loved Starbucks from one of our earlier conversations. I remember I mentioned to him that while in college, not a semester went by without me having at least 2 coffees a day from there. The baristas had even memorized my orders. Dieter told me that a client from work had gifted it to him, but he's not into fancy drinks like that. He prefers the fast food kind. Maybe I would put it to good use. I didn't really want to accept the gift card, and I swear there's a company policy somewhere to not take gifts from customers, but I reluctantly accepted. Dieter wished me a good day and said he would see me tomorrow. Shortly after I finished my shift that afternoon, my manager called me and asked me if I could switch my shift for the rest of the week because there wasn't enough coverage overnights. Basically, we were a 24-hour joint and there were always people popping up for food all hours of the day, especially on weekends, those who went clubbing and stuff. I didn't mind working at 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., but my sleep transition from going off a night shift to mornings again would definitely suck. Then again, I just had 5 more weeks left before the fall term and I would be quitting. I tried to sleep most of the day, but it was super difficult. I read a book that I wasn't interested in, and that slightly helped. I spoke to my so-called boyfriend Stan, and he told me that he was cool with the changes in our plans for the weekend, and we could chill another time. He was understanding. He said he would leave his phone on ring, so if I wrapped up my shift, I could talk to him while driving home. Stan was caring like that too. That night, I drove to Starbucks before my shift and used the gift card Dieter gave me to order a coffee Americano. When I received the receipt with the balance remaining, I was shocked. There was $195 left. Wow, that was a lot. I was not expecting that much. Dieter must work in a great place to have clients give him thank you gifts like that. About an hour into my shift, I see a familiar car pulling up to the window. It was Dieter. I told him as a joke that it wasn't his usual time to be placing an order. He laughed back and said that he knows, but he had a project at the office that ran really late. He didn't get to eat lunch, so he thought to grab something now. He said how it was a coincidence I wasn't working my regular shift either. I told him there were just some changes in the schedule. He paid for his food and then drove off. During my break, I was scrolling through my phone when my boss walked by me and said how she was talking to Jamie, another employee, who left not too long after I started my shift, and Jamie told my boss how some customer was looking for me in the afternoon, but Jamie told him I would be working a night shift. I looked up at my boss in disbelief before I spoke. I told her that the customer Jamie spoke to showed up a few hours ago and placed an order. My boss's face turned grim. It was as if she had experienced something like this before. She told me she would walk me to my car once my shift was over as a safety precaution. I clocked out at 4 a.m. and my boss made sure I was in my car and drove off while she surveillanced the parking lot. The roads were pretty clear, with just a couple cars going past me in the opposite direction. I put the radio on just to help me stay awake. I was about halfway home when I noticed that there was a car behind me. It seemed that it was following me since I left work. Or maybe that was just in my head. I couldn't even make out the license plate because the headlights were off, but I decided to be extra careful. I made 4 right turns, hoping the car would stop following me, but it didn't. I immediately pulled out my phone and called Stan, who answered on the 3rd ring. I was 5 minutes from my house, but I couldn't take the chance to go there. I told Stan that I thought I was being followed. He suggested I drive to his place. He was about 20 minutes in the opposite direction of my house. I agreed and changed my course. I began losing some distance between the car. When I got to Stan's house, I could see him waiting for me outside. I grabbed my things and ran to him and hugged him. I turned back to look at the street and saw a car passing by. It was a familiar make and model, and I finally got a look at the license plate. The windows were heavily tinted, but I knew who was behind the wheel. It was Dieter, and he definitely was stalking me. Stan and I hurried inside, and I told him the whole story. From the Starbucks card, the flowers, and Dieter showing up whenever I worked. Stan suggested I let the cops know and file a restraining order. That would give me a little peace of mind. The other thing was, I needed to speak to my manager and tell her what my concerns were. No employees should be giving out their coworkers' information to customers. I know my coworkers didn't do it on purpose, but stalkers are good at getting information by being manipulative and kind. I was fooled by Dieter, and the last time I met him, he had lied to me about working late and then proceeded to try and follow me home. What if he lied about his job and he was the one who bought the Starbucks card in the first place? Those thoughts made my stomach turn into knots. I was glad I noticed him following me and contacted Stan. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened to me. Hey Scary Story fans, I hope you enjoyed these original stories written and narrated by me. If you have a story that is fiction or non-fiction and would like it shared in the next video, you can send your submissions to susannad.tv@gmail.com. In the meantime, sweet dreams!